Today we're going to talk about drug prevention from cradle to grave, as curious as that is. Anyway, we'll see how this works. See how this works. There we go. Okay. Okay, chapter 8. Don't forget you got a paper due. Has to be 5 pages of text plus at least 1 page of bibliography. That makes 6 pages. If you have a title page, that's 7 pages, but it has to have 5 pages of text. I count lines. So don't try putting 15 lines on a page, 20 font or something. That's not going to work. It doesn't work. When you turn it in, and if it's not correct as to the formatting and whatnot, I will change it. So there you go. Talking about a select drug probably wouldn't be a bad idea if you know anything about opiates, or you want to know something about methamphetamines or whatever. That would be a good idea. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Fetus is exposed to heroin through the umbilical cord after an addicted mother shoots up. You know, this is what happened to my family. My great niece was a heroin addict. She used methamphetamine. She used anything she could get her hands on, and while she was pregnant, she shot up. Daily, weekly, she shot up a lot. So my great nephew was addicted to drugs. Took him 6 weeks to they didn't they told us, they told them, they didn't tell us, but they told that family, that immediate family, that the probability of his survival is fairly remote. So he's got all kinds of interesting problems. We don't see him very much because that side of the family is kind of embarrassed by what happened, by how their children turned out. Anyway, there you go. 14-year-old offered MDMA at a party to get rolling. Get rolling. A college student troubled by bulimia makes herself throw up 5 times a week. A young mother with 3 children hides in her room to smoke crack. A 28-year-old IV methamphetamine user infects his girlfriend with HIV when having sex after using a contaminated needle. In one office, one worker is taking Klonopin to deal with the anxiety, while another takes Prozac to combat depression. A mother with grown children battles boredom and the empty nest syndrome by compulsively playing poker machines. 50-year-old salesman on the road smokes and drinks to cope with loneliness. 74-year-old year-old with arthritis borrows hydrocodone from a neighbor to relieve the pain. Encourage pregnant mothers. Okay, so what do we do? Encourage pregnant mothers to attend prenatal care programs to teach them how drugs affect fetuses. This is one of the things we need to do. Look at that footprint. That kid's going to be a soccer player. Greater public scrutiny of parties limiting the use of club drugs. Offering counseling on eating disorders in high schools and colleges. Using outreach workers to encourage drug users to practice safe sex and use clean needles to prevent the transmission of HIV and hepatitis C while attempting to bring them into treatment. Of course, we can treat hepatitis C now. Doing an intervention to get a heavy drinking sales representative into an employee assistance program. Holding seminars to enlighten senior citizens about drug cross reactions. Each society has to decide how they want to attempt to prevent self-destructive drug use. Are they trying to prevent any use of psychoactive substances? Are they trying to ban just illicit drug use? Are they trying to limit the damage caused by use, abuse, and addiction? And of course, right now, this is a huge question because this is the argument they use against prohibition of alcohol back in the 1920s and 1930s. They were saying, well, look at all the people that are still drinking. That's not See, you haven't stopped anything. And the reality is, of course, as far as healthcare workers were concerned, they stopped a lot of things. It created an underworld of crime. Um, and is that the most important thing, or is it saving people's lives? So this is a question, a constant question that we have to ask ourselves. What is it that we're trying to do? Are we trying to keep people from smoking marijuana? Um, it's destructive to select people in the population. So what should we do? There was a sprinter in the on the Olympic team, or she wasn't on the Olympic team yet, who was banned from the sport because she was she they found marijuana in her system. So the question is, what do you want to do, and how do you define success? That's the real question. How do you define success? The United States and most other countries use a three-tier approach to fight the destructive effects of psychoactive substances: primary prevention, secondary prevention, and then tertiary prevention. Primary prevention is a program to teach the skills to help the individual resist drug use. The secondary prevention is stopping the behavior wherever and whenever it starts. And the tertiary prevention is putting people through treatment and restoring them to health. Uh, this is one of the problems with the opioid epidemic. And the other problem with the opioid epidemic that we have discovered is that the drug companies were pushing doctors to prescribe more and more opioids. Uh, why were they doing this? Because their profit margin. They wanted to make more money. And now, of course, they're being sued and they're losing their cases because they're the ones that flooded the market with opiates and opioids. Governments work on prevention by reducing the supply of drugs through interdiction of drug supplies, legislating against use, legal penalties for possession, use, and distribution, reducing the demand by treatment of drug dependency and prevention through education, emotional development, moral growth, and individual and community activities, reducing the harm that can be done to the community by promoting temperance, instituting needle exchange programs, supporting drug substitution programs, lessen the effects of alcohol, for example, designated drivers, and decriminalizing drug use. And that is what they seem to be doing around the United States with marijuana right now. We'll see how it turns out. Um, there have been a lot of people pushing for the legalization of marijuana, including in Arizona, of course. Um, all I can say is I don't like it. I don't think it's a good idea, but it's happened, and now we have to see what will be the outcome. Colorado isn't turning out very well. Of all the states that have legalized marijuana, uh, Colorado seems to be having the most trouble because, well, I'm not exactly sure why, but people were flocking to Colorado. Why they weren't flocking to Oregon and Washington and California so that they could smoke their pot, I'm not exactly sure. There are other states that have legalized it. There's about 20 states that have legalized it at this point. Anyway, people complained. There was a deal in the Iowa papers a couple of years ago about a guy that was screaming that he couldn't smoke his pot in Iowa, and people told him, "Well, just go to Colorado, you big goof." And of course, he died. He had some kind of a problem that he needed to smoke marijuana to take the pain away or something. Anyway, he eventually died, and everybody was blaming the state of Iowa for not legalizing marijuana, but that's the way it works. Worldwide, the most widely used and successful programs have been supply reduction and temperance methods. Historically, in the United States, drinking and smuggling of spirits became part of the American fabric. It was easier for farmers. The United States started as a smuggler nation. We were smuggling. The English didn't want us to trade with anybody but them. So if we wanted to sell something to the Spanish or sell something to the French, We had to smuggle it out of wherever whatever port it was in and take it there. And of course, the British tried to stop us. So we started as a smuggler nation, as weird as that seems. So if you follow NASCAR, NASCAR began with bootlegging liquor uh, in bootlegging moonshine in the southern states, in Tennessee and South Carolina, especially North Carolina. Anyway, so I mean, it's part of literally, it's part of our American fabric. It was easier for farmers on the frontier to ship their corn produce in the form of corn liquor than as grain. It's too heavy, it was too bulky, so if you could reduce it down to grain alcohol, to corn alcohol, then it was a lot easier. However, with the influx of evangelical influences, the Methodist and the Baptist movements in the United States, temperance became more acceptable as an alternative to heavy drinking and drunkenness. Such behavior came to be seen as destructive, sinful, and immoral. An effort was made to get drinkers to switch from hard spirits to weaker beer, wine, and hard cider. Dealing with the problem of alcohol consumption has been a continuing problem in the United States, fluctuating between moderation and forced abstinence or prohibition. As a country, use and the responsive movements have waxed and waned in 70-year cycles since the beginning of our history. In 1780, Dr. Benjamin Rush tried to legislate control over distilled spirits. Benjamin Rush was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. 1850 temperance movement supported replacing distilled spirits with more benign drinks. 1920 prohibition of alcohol. 1990 legal drinking age raised to 21 nationwide. And of course, I remember that because what was I in 1990? I was 31 years old. No, I was older than that. I was 41 years old. 40, yeah, it's 41. It's 41 years old. 1990. Yeah. So I remember all the arguments, all the crazy arguments that were going on. There were some states where the legal drinking age was 18. Those states didn't want to change their drinking laws, but the federal government forced them to. And the way it forced them to was that it told them that they weren't going to get any more federal highway maintenance funds unless they lowered their drinking age. That's what happened. Did the 18th Amendment work? Alcoholic psychosis admissions to state hospitals in New York and Massachusetts was cut nearly in half. Deaths due to cirrhosis of the liver were cut in half during Prohibition. Remember, Prohibition was in force for 11 years, 12 years, maybe 13 years. There was less crime in general. There was less domestic violence. Even after Prohibition stopped, drinking levels remained low and didn't return to pre-Prohibition levels until the 1950s. And one of the reasons it went up in the 1950s was not because there were so many more people drinking. Actually, there were so many more people, but our population had doubled. So here we are in the 1950s. We finally made it back up to the pre-prohibition level of drinking. Medical problems, but that was because of the increased population. Medical problems increased from unregulated manufacturing of alcohol, but the level never approached the medical problems that the nation experienced from alcohol. Some argue that Prohibition brought organized crime to the United States, but in reality, organized crime has been a part of the American underworld fabric since long before the 1920s. Unfortunately, one problem with Prohibition was that because banning alcohol was touted as a cure for all of society's ills, treatment of alcohol addiction was cut. Some people claim that Prohibition was repealed because of the universal condemnation of the ban, but the real reason for its repeal was due to the need for tax revenues from its manufacture and use during the Great Depression. Pressure from the wets and fatigue dealing with the continued argument did not hurt either. And of course, the organization that was the most fatigued was the criminal justice system. Criminal justice system was buried in the need for uh, controlling alcohol. In 1962, before the Civil Rights Movement hit its stride and before the Vietnam War, only 2% of the American public used illicit drugs. However, with the aforementioned social movements and an era of civil disobedience streaking through the youth of the 60s and 70s, 31% of the population was using illicit drugs. They went from 2% to 31% in the 70s. During this time, knowledge based programs were started to teach about pharmacological effects, causes of addiction, health effects of drug use, legal penalties. There is no evidence that information alone causes change in behavior, unfortunately, even though that information was out there. So you may wonder what the hell happened to me. I was in 1962. I was 13 years old. By the 1960s and 1970s, I was in the military. I was in college from 1967 to 1971. Right in the middle of all of this. Now, why in the world didn't I turn out to be a drug addict? And the answer is because I was an athlete. I ran college track. And because of that, of course, it's not like there were people on everybody going, "Hey, come on, man, let's get stoned." That wasn't happening to me because I was an athlete, and I ran with the other athletes. I ran on the track team, and there were several people that started using drugs who had to stop running track because it ruined their ability to perform. And I saw that kind of stuff, and I told myself, this is stupid. Why in the world would I want to look like you, or not be able to run, or not be able to? It was our pole vaulter was the worst one. He was. Yeah, we lost our pole vaulter. Oh well. Skill building and resiliency programs, as more research was being done, was discovered that there were obvious psychological and developmental factors that predisposed select individuals to drug use. Programs aimed at these individuals targeted social skills that might protect the individual from experimentation. Skills that address risk factors that might lead to drug abuse include general competency building, training in self-esteem, socially acceptable behavior, decision making, self-assertion, problem solving, vocational skills, coping resistance skills, developing self-reliance, confidence, and inner resources. Skill building and resiliency programs, reinforcing protective factors in resiliency, build on natural strengths that people already have available. What you're trying to get them to do is develop optimism, empathy, insight, intellectual competence, self-esteem, direction and purpose in life, determination, supportive friends and family, opportunities to belong to meaningful groups. This is what we're trying to do. And if you look at the psychology program that you're in and some of the classes that we teach, this is exactly what we're doing. We're trying to increase people's optimism, their empathy, their insight, their intellectual competence, yada, yada, yada. Skill building and resiliency programs address and reverse risk factors. Risk factors associated with future substance use disorders should be examined with the focus being to seek strategies to minimize their development. Early aggressive oppositional disorder, poverty, lack of parental supervision, dysfunctional drug abuse peers. And of course, this is a picture of dysfunctional drug abuse peers trying to get this young man to drink. So these are the risk factors: early aggressive oppositional disorder, poverty, lack of parental supervision, and dysfunctional friends. Skill building and resiliency programs support system development, endeavoring to reduce stress for students, which should decrease the need for drug and alcohol abuse. Changing the environment. One early target for concentration is the social and environmental influences that lead to drug use. family values, peer group values, and practices in schools. This is an attempt to get the entire neighborhood to take responsibility for preventing substance abuse by assessing the needs of the community, coordinating existing services, changing laws and public policy to reduce availability, increase funding for family, school, and community prevention, community wide training and planning. The public health model for prevention sees addiction as a disease. The user is genetically predisposed host. The environment contributes to the problem. The drug is introduced, causing the disease. Prevention involves disrupting the relationship between one or more of these factors. The family approach, this approach sees addiction stemming from family dynamics. Families are bolstered through family support, skills training, therapy, parenting programs. This approach focuses on the family rather than the environment. Supply reduction seeks to decrease drug abuse by reducing the availability of drugs and is the responsibility of the state and local police departments, the Department of Justice, the FBI, the Bureau of Prisons, the INS, Immigration and Naturalization Services, DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, Treasury Department, the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, the Customs Service, Department of Transportation, and the Department of Defense, DOD. The responsible agencies reduce drug supplies by interdicting drug smugglers, manning law enforcement activities at border crossings, limiting the supply of precursor chemicals, disrupting criminal gangs and organized crime, passing more severe laws, increasing community police officers, disrupting money laundering and seizing assets, supporting local and state police in high volume drug areas, supporting the anti drug efforts of foreign countries, enacting treaties to work towards supply reduction. Drug laws in the United States have evolved to curtail the supply and use of illicit drugs. Long prison terms and forfeiture of assets have been used to discourage suppliers and manufacturers of drugs. Users are discouraged by facing stiffer and increased jail time. Possession of paraphernalia adds to the length of time spent in jail. Many states, including California, enacted three strike laws in the 1980s, which mandated life imprisonment if an individual committed 3 felonies in their lifetime. Since 1980, prison populations have tripled. 55% of the inmates in federal prisons were convicted of drug offenses. If you count felonies committed to support drug habits, the percentage increases to 60 to 80%. Over half the inmates incarcerated admit to using drugs while they committed their offense. The percentage of teenagers is even higher. A great deal of money has been spent on supply reduction. Advocates estimate that it has resulted in 10 to 15% supply reduction. The severe penalties have resulted in a delayed impulse to use. It has opened up treatment. It has kept people in treatment. Detractors of the policy complain of the minor impact on supply. These individuals support a more demand reduction approach. Demand reduction involves the 3 tiers of prevention: primary, secondary, and tertiary. The primary approach is by promoting abstinence to help young people refuse drugs, delay the age of first use, encourage healthy non-drug alternatives. The age of first use is the strongest predictor of drug or alcohol use. Individuals who experiment before age 12 have a 4 to 5 times likelihood of further drug use. And now we'll talk about the secondary prevention. Secondary prevention seeks to halt drug use once it has begun. This tier of prevention adds intervention to the primary strategies of education and skill building. The biggest problem with this program is denial by the user and their concealment of use, making them difficult to identify. Another problem with this tier of prevention is that there is a lag phase between the first drug use and physical and emotional problems. The user feels that the educational programs are overstated. And if you've ever talked to somebody who has who is in this state, they will tell you that they're all lies, that the government makes all this stuff up. As wonderful as that is. Tertiary prevention seeks to provide treatment for the user to restore them to health. Compulsive drug use is addressed through the group intervention, focusing on detoxification, abstinence, and recovery. Cue extension therapy that desensitizes the user to people, places, and things that triggers use. Family therapy, group psychotherapy, or residential treatment. Instruction in relapse prevention and life management skills, psychopharmacological strategies, promotion of healthy lifestyles, development of support and aftercare systems, and this is part of the 12-step program. Tertiary programs result in decreased drug use or abstinence in 40 to 50% of the cases, 74% reduction in crime, 2,500,000 people receive treatment nationwide. 21,700,000 people are estimated to need treatment nationwide. So as you can see, because of prohibition, we reduced all those treatment programs, and now we're having a difficult time getting them back. The other problem is that the Republican Party doesn't like to spend money on this kind of a thing because they see it as a waste of money. They would just like to build more prisons and put people in prison more. Oh well, not all programs seek abstinence. Harm reduction programs recognize that recovery is difficult, and many will relapse before they are able to live their lives drug-free. This technique focuses on minimizing the personal and social problems caused by drugs. 3 harm reduction programs, needle exchange programs to reduce the spread of HIV and hepatitis C, bleach distribution programs to reduce the spread of HIV and hepatitis C, legal drug substitution for illegal drugs. The replacement of heroin with methadone is a good example of the drug exchange program. And as I told you before, my great niece was on that kind of a program, and she was shooting up heroin and using methadone at the same time. Harm reduction programs have also proposed some controversial ideas. They affect the fact that people will experiment with drugs, and they want to educate them to use drugs responsibly. Decriminalizing or even legalizing illegal drugs, treat addicts by reducing their usage to the manageable level rather than seek abstinence, allow addicts to design their own intervention and treatment programs, harm reduction programs. Some of the most lucrative advertising on television is advertising for alcoholic beverages. Before 1996, hard liquor was not advertised on television, only beer. The idea from the temperance argument of the 19th century was that replacing hard liquor with beer would reduce drunkenness and the destruction of alcohol. However, more people die from cirrhosis of the liver caused by beer than cirrhosis caused by hard liquor. Damage done by legal drugs cause more damage to society than illegal drugs. Alcohol, tobacco, and prescription drugs. Advertising for these drugs brings new users into the fold every year. Facts to remember about prevention: there are no quick fixes. Prevention will never be complete because there will always be new potential users to convince. Prevention campaigns become progressively more difficult in time because they have already reached the easy cells. No single approach has been shown to work consistently. Legalization of marijuana and the medical forms of marijuana will make it more and more difficult to control all drugs. When we see depictions of drug addicts in the media, they are often portrayed as weak, bad, stupid, crazy, immoral, poor, and disenfranchised. 1/3 of the homeless have a drug or alcohol problem. This only represents 5% of the addicts in the United States. The truth is that whites are the most likely to have either a drug or alcohol problem. African Americans are just as likely as whites to have a drug problem, but the least likely to have an alcohol problem. Hispanics are the least likely to have a drug problem. People in low-income areas are less likely to receive treatment and more likely to be incarcerated for their drug use. More affluent people are more likely to receive treatment and probation. When I was in Mississippi, I had a student who was complaining that she didn't have anybody to date, and I said, "Well, what about the people you graduated from high school with?" And she said, "They're all either in jail, dead, or on probation." She was black, and she had gone to a black high school. Um, and in the southern states, when an African American gets in trouble, they throw the book at him. That's the way it was. This is back in the 90s. Hopefully things have gotten a little bit better. I kind of doubt it, but maybe it has. 53% of the individuals in prison for drug crimes are African American. 26% of those in prison for drug crimes are white. Among the highest paid occupation in the United States, physicians, they are as likely to be addicted as the general population, though they are more likely to be addicted to prescription drugs. Members of Mensa and gifted high school students have high rates of addiction. Members of the clergy have high rates of alcoholism. Now, you wonder why people that are so intelligent are having drug problems, and the answer is because they feel like they're not part of society. They have to dummy down everything that they do, and it's very frustrating, and um, it's difficult for them to maintain that type of a mindset. While addiction rates fluctuate with attempts to curtail use, over the last 40 years, the age of addicts has declined with the age of first use. Between 1991 and 2005, the number of 8th through 10th graders who used marijuana increased 60%. Juvenile arrestees testing positive for drugs other than alcohol ranged from 48 to 65% in 2005. It is estimated that 18.6% of infants are exposed to alcohol in the womb, 4.5% of fetuses are exposed to cocaine, 17.4% of fetuses are exposed to tobacco. Fetal alcohol syndrome is the third most common birth defect and the leading cause of intellectual disability in the United States. My great niece would post on Facebook. She wanted everybody to see how big her belly was, and every time she posed for a picture, every month or so that she posed for a picture, she had a cigarette in her fingers. I don't know if she thought that was the coolest thing in the world, but well, anyway, it didn't turn out very well. Drug use during pregnancy can create nutritional and obstetrical complications, anemia, sexually transmitted diseases, diabetes, high blood pressure, neurological damage, weakened immune system, poor nutrition, hepatitis C exposure, endocarditis, HIV/AIDS exposure. 80% of infants born with HIV in the United States were born to mothers who were IV drug users or the partners of men who were IV drug users. Worldwide, the figure is 90%. Unfortunately, the life expectancy of a child born with HIV is only 2 years. With AZT treatment for the pregnant mother, rates of HIV infection drop from 25% to 8%. Pregnant addicts often live chaotic lifestyles that don't afford time or the wherewithal to seek or accept prenatal care or medical intervention. When the addict is an adolescent, the individual is at greater risk and even less likely to seek treatment. Other problems are likely because of her physical, emotional, and behavioral immaturity. Besides the effect of the drug on the fetus, the mother's toxic environment often has deleterious effects on the fetus and the mother. Poor nutrition, bloodborne infections, domestic violence, and sexually transmitted diseases. Most psychoactive substances readily cross the placental barrier, meaning that the tiny infant is exposed to the same drugs at the same level as the mother. After birth, the drugs will be passed to the baby in the mother's breast milk. Because of the excessive organ and brain development, the 12 weeks, the first trimester, is the most critical period in the baby's life. Drugs used during this time period can change the baby both physically and mentally. However, since the brain continues to grow throughout gestation, neurological damage can be done at any juncture during gestation. If heroin or cocaine is used during the last trimester, they might cause premature birth. If the baby is born after the mother has used drugs on a regular basis, the neonatal period will be fraught with intoxication, withdrawal, and eventually developmental or learning delays. If the infant is given concentrated care after birth, they will manage to catch up with their non drug exposed peers, potentially by toddlerhood. Alcohol is one of the most devastating effects on a fetus of all the drugs. The effects of alcohol have been studied more than any other psychoactive substance because of its prevalence and the general acceptability of the drug. When a mother drinks during pregnancy, the possible effects on the fetus are referred to as FASD, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. The most severe form of FASD is fetal alcohol syndrome. Fetal alcohol syndrome is characterized by physical abnormalities, mental abnormalities, behavioral abnormalities. These babies are born to mothers who drank heavily during their pregnancy. Growth of the FAS fetus occurs in the womb, reduced height, reduced weight, reduced head circumference, reduced brain growth, reduced brain size, facial deformities, shortened eyelids, thin upper lip, flattened mid-face, shallow groove in the upper lip, heart problems, limb problems, delayed intellectual development, neurological abnormalities, behavioral problems, visual problems, hearing loss, and balance and gait problems. Part of FASD are less severe disorders, alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorders, ARND, alcohol-related birth defects, ARBD. Worldwide, FAS affects as many as 2.9 per 1,000 births. In the United States, the rate is 1 per 1,000 births. Among African Americans, the rate is 6 per 1,000. Asian, Hispanics, and whites have rates between 1 to 2 per 1,000. And American Indians have rates between 10 to 30 per 1,000 births. One study of FAS adolescents and adults, it was discovered that all of them had been physically and sexually abused, 60% of the abuse occurring before adulthood. The individuals averaged 6 diagnosable mental illnesses. Select ones had 10 or more mental illnesses. Cocaine and amphetamines are used by 558,000 women in the United States every year, with most of them falling into the reproductively viable range. In the 1980s, when cocaine use was at its peak, it was estimated that 4.5% of all babies born in the United States were exposed to cocaine in the womb. In inner city hospitals where cocaine use was more prevalent, the percentages range from 15 to 25%. Unfortunately, when did I start working there? 1984, I started working at Children's Hospital in Omaha, and this was almost all of our babies in neonatal intensive care unit were because of cocaine. It was just really irritating more than anything else. The effects of stimulants, increased heart rate, constricted blood vessels affects not only the mother but the unborn fetus. For the fetus, the constricted blood vessels result in restricted blood flow, restricted nutrients, restricted oxygen. This retards development. For habitual users, the effects can be more pronounced. In extreme cases, the increased blood pressure may cause the placenta to separate from the uterine wall, resulting in spontaneous abortion. Excessive use of stimulants can raise the fetus's blood pressure, causing a stroke. Using in the third trimester can result in extreme activity in the fetus, causing uterine contractions and premature labor. Withdrawal for the fetus involves several weeks of extreme agitation, increased respiration, hyperactivity, possible seizure. Effects last into the child's second year with lifelong disability rates of 33%. Since opioid use tends to be more continuous than the binge use of stimulants, the effects are greater. problems include severe infections from IV drug use for the mother, fetal growth retardation, miscarriage, stillbirth, separation of the placenta from the uterus. Babies born to heroin addicts are often premature, smaller, and weaker. These infants have abnormal sleep patterns that lead to a 600% increase in SIDs, in SIDS deaths, sudden infant death syndrome deaths. 60 to 80% of the babies born to opioid addicted mothers go through withdrawals 2 to 3 days after they are born. Hyperactivity, incessant high pitched crying, increased muscle tone, irregular sleep patterns, increased respiration, poor suckling, failure to thrive, irritability, sweating, tremors, diarrhea, sneezing, vomiting, and very often death. Marijuana is used by 5 to 17% of pregnant women during their pregnancy. A longitudinal study of marijuana exposed fetuses in Canada showed that poor short term memory and verbal reasoning at age 3, continued poor memory through childhood, lowered verbal performance through childhood, impulsive hyperactive behavior, conduct problems, distractibility, and poor executive function. The problem with marijuana is the same as the problem with any other drug smoked. Decreased oxygen, irritated alveoli and bronchi in the lungs, decreased weight, withdrawals, abnormal responses to visual stimuli, increased tremulousness, easily startled, and high-pitched cry. Drug fetal effects, category A, vitamins other than vitamin A, no fetal risks. Category B, acetaminophen and ibuprofen, no fetal risks. Category C, most medications, no fetal risks. Category D, anti-seizure, benzodiazepines, and tetracycline. Tetracycline is an antibiotic used for acne usually. Fetal risk, but the risks are considered appropriate to the need of the mother. Category X, teratogenic, Accutane, which is a strong tetracycline, and vitamin A. Fetal risks are too great for the benefits. So there you go. Any medication prescribed for a pregnant woman should be closely monitored. Use of NSAIDs can elevate the pregnant mother's blood pressure. Benzodiazepines can accumulate in the fetus's blood, even at safe levels for the mother. Because of the fetus's smaller system, it will take longer for the infant to clear the drugs from his system and may be born addicted. Because of the slowness in clearing the infant's system, the baby will be born with withdrawals that may persist for weeks. At the turn of the 20th century, women rarely smoked. In 1920, only 5% of pregnant women smoked. Pregnant women smoking peaked in 1997 at 28.2%. In 2005, only 22.5% of pregnant women smoked during their pregnancy. 17% of the women smoked cigarettes. 8.82% smoked right up to the time they gave birth. The highest rates were among African Americans at 20.12%. The second highest rate was among whites at 14.2%. Cigarettes are especially dangerous because of the nicotine and carbon monoxide found in the smoke, along with 2,000 other compounds. Both carbon monoxide and nicotine cross the placental barrier and reduce fetal oxygen supplies. Women who smoke or come in contact with secondhand smoke are in greater risk of premature delivery. Heavy smoking mothers are twice as likely to miscarry or have spontaneous abortions. Babies born to heavy smokers average a birth weight of 7 ounces less, with a smaller head circumference and about an inch shorter. With heavy smokers, there is a higher incidence of cleft palate, congenital heart defects, minor nerve and brain defects, higher incidence of sudden infant death syndrome, weaker sucking reflex, depressed immune system, and more respiratory infections. Caffeine is a common drug taken in by pregnant women in tea, coffee, and soda pop. In one study, 75% of babies born had caffeine in their system at birth. Infants tend to have lower tolerance for caffeine than adults do. Caffeine seems to have no long lasting effects on the child, though the physicians warn pregnant women away from its use during pregnancy. And my daughter was such a good girl. She stayed away from caffeine, even from caffeine while she was pregnant. She wanted a perfect child, and he's pretty close. Prevention of damage should start as soon as the woman discovers that she is pregnant. Physicians will ask the woman the four P's. Parents, did either of the woman's parents have a problem with drugs or alcohol? Partner, does the woman's partner have a problem with alcohol or drugs? Past, has the woman ever drunk beer, wine, or liquor? Pregnancy, in the month before the woman knew that she was pregnant, did she smoke cigarettes, take drugs, or drink beer, wine, or liquor? If necessary, the woman can be treated for her dependence. The most frequently abused drug, 46.5% among high school seniors, tobacco 21.6%, marijuana 18.3%, smokeless tobacco 6.1%, painkillers 3.8%, amphetamines 3.7%, tranquilizers 2.7%, cocaine 2.5%, inhalants 1.5%, hallucinogens 1.5%, MDMA 1.3%, steroids 1.1%, heroin 0.4%, any illicit drug 22.1%. In the last 30 years, tobacco and alcohol use has actually declined while marijuana use has primarily stayed the same. School environment has the greatest influence on drug and alcohol use. If the individual can reach the age of 21 without smoking and drinking, they probably never will. Of the people who experiment with alcohol or tobacco, more susceptible to peer pressure, 85.7% are still smoking in the 12th grade. If they have been drunk sometime in high school, 83.3% are still getting drunk. If they have ever tried marijuana, 76.4% are still toking. Adolescents who use marijuana weekly are 6 times likelier to cut class or skip school. One of the great oxymorons of adolescence is that while they think of their own thoughts as beyond question and their lives as invulnerable, they commit some of the most ill-advised acts that can sometimes lead to death. Intoxication, intoxication in driving, intoxication in having sex. 70% of teen suicides involve alcohol. 50% of date rapes involve alcohol. 40% of drownings involve alcohol. This lady has passed out. I hope these are her friends, because she is extremely vulnerable right now. Alcohol and drug use among adolescents has a great deal to do with crime. More than half the juvenile males arrested test positive for one or more illegal drugs. Marijuana is the most frequently found drug among these individuals, even though they're committing crimes, which is counterintuitive to some people because they think it makes you so mellow, man. Why in the world would you do something like that? But the reality is, we can see what the reality is. One of the major reasons people use psychoactive substances is to delay taking care of their problems. When this happens with an adolescent, they may learn to deal with life's conflicts until they are deep into adulthood. They have prolonged the maturation process. Factors that lead to an adolescent to use psychoactive substances: being subject to physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, being mentally or emotionally disturbed, lacking self-esteem, peer group encouragement to use drugs, inconsistent discipline when drug use is tolerated, dropping out of school, getting caught in juvenile justice system, getting pregnant, living in poverty, lacking alternative activities, being in a school that does not control drug problems. Factors that help children avoid drugs: strong sense of family participation and involvement, family position on drugs, alcohol, and sex that the child can adopt as their own, strong spiritual sense and community involvement, attachment to a clean and sober adult role model. There are programs that have been developed to help school-age children, K through 12, stay away from drugs and alcohol. The DARE program, Drug Abuse Resistance Education, 16 to 17 week sessions conducted by uniformed police for 5th and 6th graders. Dare to Be You, the DTBY program, the Family Matter program, the Lions Quest Skills for Adolescents. Uh, Curiously, I did academic research for the Lions Quest program when I was in California. So I'm very much aware of the Lions Quest program, and this is actually a Lions Quest. We surveyed all the junior high students in Los Angeles in public schools. It was really quite interesting. Multisystemic therapy, the MST, the New Beginnings program, project towards no drug abuse, seeking safety, life skills training. It increases your social skills to help resist peer pressure. All the programs to help prevent drug abuse are similar. They all involve a coordinated effort among family members, teachers, and other school officials. These school-based programs tend to teach life skills, resistance education, normative education. Normative education aims at correcting erroneous beliefs about the prevalence and the acceptability of alcohol and drug use among an individual's peers. Family-focused primary prevention is a necessary adjunct to any school-based program. Experimentation, social use, habituation, and abuse usually begins in junior high, the 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. Because of this proclivity, primary prevention needs to continue while secondary prevention is put in place to deal with those who didn't get the message. School personnel and families should be trained to recognize drug use and how to deal with the consequences. For those students who begin abusing drugs on a regular basis, treatment must be sought to reduce the probability of a lifetime of abuse. Such a program is the Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, the PBIS, adjustments to the environment to reduce the problem, building general competencies and teaching replacement skills, implementing consequences to promote positive behaviors and deter problems, crisis management, or relapse plan. 1 in 4 children in the United States is exposed to alcohol abuse or dependence in their family. 1 out of 4, that's 25%. These children will be affected by alcohol even when they don't use. These children may play different roles in their family. Hero or model child tries to bring pride to the family. The problem child demands attention and is the most likely to use psychoactive substances. The lost child is shy and sidesteps problems by avoiding family and social activities. Mascot or clown, a family clown tries to ease tension in a dysfunctional family by being funny or cute, has a hard time growing up. And you probably have seen all of these in your peers when you were in high school. Many alcoholic beverage companies target their advertising toward college freshmen, as establishing brand loyalty may generate as much as $20,000 to $50,000 in revenue over the individual's lifetime. 49% of full-time college students binge drink and or abuse prescription and legal drugs. This is 2.5 times the amount of abuse found in the general population. The statistics on college students has varying degrees of positive and negative. Daily smoking dropped from 15% in 1993 to 12% in 2005. Fraternity and sorority members are more likely to drink than non-members, 88% versus 67%. Binge drinking, 64% versus 37%. Driving drunk, 33% versus 21%. Use marijuana, 21% versus 16%, and smoke, 26% versus 21%. Only 6% of addicted college students seek help. 78% of college students who use illicit drugs have sex, compared to 44% of those who never use drugs. Psychoactive substances do have a heavy impact on our college campuses. 1,717 deaths in 2007 from alcohol-related injuries, 97,000 victims of alcohol-related rape or sexual assault, 696 assaults by another student who has been binge drinking. In 2002, the federal government legislated to deny college students federal aid if they had a drug conviction on their record. Of the 10,437,000 who applied, 41,000 were denied aid, while an equal number were waived who had completed a drug treatment program. Even the non-drinkers are affected by the drinkers. In a study of a campus where over 50% of the campus were binge drinkers, 87% of the non-drinking other students reported being victims of assault, being victims of unwanted sexual advances, having sleep interrupted, having study interrupted, suffering property damage, having to care for a drunken student, having to clean up after a drunken student, having impaired quality of life because of the drinking. Drinking and drug experimentation are seen by some as a rite of passage for college students. However, one approach to the control of college drinking is a normative approach where the myths of rampant drinking are debunked. For example, 68% of college students thought that their peers thought frequent intoxication was acceptable, while only 14% actually did. Within 18 months, within disseminating normative information, one college campus found 16% reduction of drinking to get drunk, 21% reduction of frequent heavy drinking, 31% reduction in missed classes, 36% reduction in property damage, and 40% reduction in unprotected sex. Means of controlling alcohol use, regular campus drinking, 25% of campuses ban beer, 32% prohibit liquor on campus, 98% prohibit kegs in dorms. Provide alcohol, tobacco, and drug-free dorms, wellness halls, and 2/3 of the campuses offer such dorms. Prohibit alcohol at campus events and fraternities, sorority parties, announce and enforce campus alcohol and drug policies, work with the local community to make sure that alcohol is not served to minors, strengthen academic requirements. Means of controlling alcohol use on college campuses, schedule more classes on Friday, keep the library and recreational facilities open longer, prevent alcohol promotions on campus, notify parents when students run afoul of the drug and alcohol regulations, provide server training for bartenders at college-sponsored functions, ban alcoholic beverage advertising in the college newspaper. 50% of the campuses ban such advertising. Controlling alcohol use on college campuses, integrate substance abuse education into the curriculum, maintain a substance abuse officer to oversee on-campus use and abuse, join a higher education prevention consortia. There are 90 such consortia in the United States. Create programs to work with the neighborhood and community, initiate early detection, intervention, enforcement, and referral. Studies show that a good drug education program will actually increase the level of experimentation but decrease abuse. Bad education will actually increase abuse. Studies show that as most college students mature, their alcohol and drug use becomes more sensible. People take psychoactive substances either to enhance some aspect of their sexual sensation or not realizing that it will interfere with their sexual sensations. Select psychoactive substances can replace normal sexual emotions, meaning that the emotions will seem to be there when they are not. Intimacy, comfort, love for one's children, and release from anxiety. Love, sex, and drugs. A glass or two of wine to get in the mood. A cigarette after sex. A popper to intensify an erection or orgasm. Amphetamines to delay ejaculation. Marijuana to enhance the newness of a situation. Ecstasy to increase empathy. Drugs are desirable when the individual feels a physical, social, or emotional deficit from aging, from shyness, lack of confidence, diminished desire, diminished abilities. Unfortunately, the same drug, when used long-term, may create the reverse effects: lack of sexual interest, physical depression, inability to achieve an erection, inability to achieve an orgasm. Drugs may trigger sexual aggression, sexual harassment, rape, child molestation, high-risk sexual behavior. The three main effects of psychoactive drugs on sexual behavior are desire, excitation, and orgasm. They do this by releasing hormones, by affecting blood flow, by affecting blood pressure, by affecting nerve sensitivity, by affecting muscle tension. Some examples of psychoactive interference with normal sexual activity: heroin desensitizes penile and vaginal nerve endings. Alcohol diminishes spinal reflexes, decreasing sensitivity and erectile ability. Steroids increase testosterone, making the user more sexually aggressive. Cocaine and amphetamines release dopamine, which mirrors the release of dopamine during orgasm. Many drugs affect the hypothalamus, which can trigger unwanted hormonal changes. Chronic drug users combine sex and drugs to lower inhibitions, to try to make themselves perform better, to increase their fantasies, to shield themselves from their sexuality, to remove themselves from emotional involvement. Alcohol effects on sexual functions are directly related to the blood alcohol levels. Women may use alcohol to lower their inhibitions, to increase sexual pleasure, to raise self esteem and feelings of adequacy. However, with the increase of alcohol, there is actually less of a chance of orgasm. Women are more likely to drink to hide sexual dysfunction than men. Engaging in sex seems to be something to do while drunk. For men, enough alcohol can actually prevent them from being able to have an erection, as it diminishes spinal reflexes, decreasing sensitivity and erectile ability. Alcohol also lowers testosterone levels while increasing the female hormone estradiol. Chronic male drinkers will have a greatly decreased testosterone and greatly increased estradiol, creating abnormalities in sex steroid metabolism. Men like alcohol because it anesthetizes the area of the brain that causes fight, flight, and fear, making them more aggressive. However, it does lower testosterone, making men more likely to act asexual. In one study of heavy drinkers, 60% reported being impotent. Amphetamines and cocaine have always had the reputation of being sexual enhancers, but this is especially true in the gay community because it increases your confidence, it prolongs erections, it increases endurance, it intensifies orgasms. This is especially true of methamphetamine, which lasts longer in the individual's system. Amphetamines and cocaine can greatly intensify pleasurable feelings that an individual gets from sex. Unfortunately, with continued use in sexual situations, the intensity lessens. As dysfunction begins, the individual will seek to use more and more of the drug to achieve normal sexual functioning. The drug will also intensify pre existing sexual proclivities. If this is something as harmless as sexual inhibition, it will make the individual more confident. If their proclivity is pedophilia or rape, the drug can intensify these behaviors as well. While cocaine may work wonders for men when first used, with prolonged use, the effects may be unintended: delayed ejaculation, decrease in sexual desire, difficulty achieving ejaculation. In women, cocaine may disrupt the menstrual cycle, cause difficulty in achieving orgasm, decrease desire. Smoking after sex has become a cliche for having had sex. In truth, long-term tobacco use is associated with a lower testosterone and erectile dysfunction. In women, it causes reduced fertility. The opioids are depressants and so may act to lower an individual's inhibitions when first used in concert with sex. However, with prolonged use, long-term users report impaired performance and a decrease in sexual drive. In one study, the degree of impotence among males was 39%, jumping to 53% when the individuals were actually using the drug. Some of the sedative hypnotics have been touted as sexual enhancers: benzodiazepines, barbiturates, and quaaludes. The reality is that the individual has lowered inhibitions, which makes it more likely that they will be willing to perform sexually. With prolonged use, the individual begins to suffer from sexual dysfunction and apathy towards sexual stimulation. Select sedative hypnotics have been used as date rape drugs. Rohypnol causes amnesia and lowered inhibitions that makes an individual less likely to resist a sexual assault. GHB lowers inhibition and makes sex more pleasurable. Too much can lead to sleep or even coma. The drug also has amnestic effects, meaning that they can't remember anything. Marijuana effects have much to do with the attitude of the individual when smoking, much like LSD. In a pleasant social situation, like at a party or on a date, the drug will make people less inhibited and more relaxed, making it more likely that they will do things that they wouldn't normally do. Research looking at marijuana in a controlled setting found that the drug inhibited orgasm, but not desire. The biggest problem with chronic marijuana use is that the user does not learn to have sexual relations without being stoned. MDMA and MDA give their user a warm feeling toward others and induce a heightened sensual awareness. However, the heightened sensual awareness does not enhance the ability to have an erection. As well, orgasms are more difficult to achieve. Sexual excitement is unlikely when high on the drugs. If this response is going to occur, it is usually as the person is coming off the drugs. Neither PCP or LSD are considered sensual drugs. As an anesthetic, PCP has been used to deaden the pain in select sexual practices in both the gay and heterosexual communities. LSD, as a matter of fact, no psychedelics are known as sexual enhancers. Nitrites are used in both the gay and the straight communities as a vasodilator and as a muscle relaxer. Users claim that nitrites prolong and enhance orgasmic sensations as if used just prior to the orgasm. Like Viagra and other ED medications, nitrites act as vasodilators promoting penile erection. Nitrites also relax the anal sphincter muscles supporting anal intercourse. Psychotropic medications often will interfere with sexual functioning. Tricyclic antidepressants have been linked to decreased desire, problems with erection, and delayed orgasm. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors also cause delayed or inhibited orgasm and impaired erection abilities. Antipsychotics inhibit erectile function and ejaculation as well as desire. With heavy doses of lithium, desire decreases and individuals report having difficulty maintaining erections. Aphrodisiacs actually may or may not exist, though some drugs will enhance sexual situations. Erectile dysfunction medications, Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, allow increased blood flow to the penis but do nothing for your sexual desire. Human pheromones increase sexual desire and sexual stimulation, but only select pheromones work on select people. Yohimbine can enhance blood pressure and heart rate, increasing penile blood flow, but no desire. Drugs are often present in cases of sexual assault. 51% of victims reported using drugs or alcohol before the assault. 44% of the assailants used drugs or alcohol before the assault. Irrational or inappropriate desires may occur after alcohol lowers inhibitions and muddles rational thought. Stimulants make the user feel more confident and aggressive, making it more likely that a date will be assaulted. Sedatives lower inhibitions, making women more susceptible to assault. Marijuana makes users more suggestible to sexual activity. PCP and heroin make users less sensitive to pain, making it more likely that they will damage their partners during sex. Drug use peaked in the 1980s. Positive drug rates at work were 13.6% in 1988. By 2006, with actual more drug testing and the rate had dipped to 3.8%. The lower drug use levels at work may be due as much to drug users avoiding companies that drug test as drug usage at work declining. Estimates are that 8.2% of all workers use illegal drugs. 8.4% of full-time workers are heavy alcohol users. Contrary to the image of the addict skulking around alleys to support their drug habit, 74.8% of addicts over 18 are employed as full-time or part-time employees. 80% of binge drinkers are employed. 62% of people diagnosed with substance abuse disorder were employed. Unfortunately, substance abusing employees do not make good employees. They are late 3 to 14 times more often. They are absent 5 to 7 times more often. They make more mistakes than other employees. They tend to have a lower output. They're more likely to appear in a greater number of grievance hearings. They are 3 to 4 times more likely to have an accident on the job. They use 3 times more sick leave. They file for workers' compensation 5 times more frequently. They overutilize health insurance along with their family. They cause premiums to increase for medical insurance. They endanger the health and well-being of coworkers. The most common drug found in employees' samples, marijuana 48.8%, cocaine 16.4%, amphetamines 9.3%, opiates 6.7%, benzodiazepines 5.4%. 26% of people tested for cause tested positive. The area of the country that was the most likely to have positive drug tests was in the rural South. Employee assistance programs, or EAPs, are programs established to help employees become better employees by providing treatment and counseling when needed. 45% of all employees in the United States are covered by EAPs. 70% of all employees working for organizations with more than 500 employees are covered by EAPs. EAPs do work. Northrop saw a 43% increase in production from the first 100 employees they sent to an alcohol treatment program. Employees of the Philadelphia Police Department who went through treatment reduced their sick days by 38% and their injury days by 62%. Providing EAPs for their employees at the Oldsmobile plant in Lansing reduced the lost work hours by 49%, healthcare claims by 29%, sick leaves by 56%, grievances by 78%, disciplinary problems by 63%, and accidents by 82%. Oldsmobiles, of course, are not made anymore. They stopped making them during the Obama administration, 2008, I think. There are several types of EAPs based on financial needs, internal in-house programs found in large companies who can afford the expense, fixed free contracts, the company contracts at a set fee for any programs needed, fee-for-service contracts, the company contracts with an outside EAP on an as-needed basis. Consortia, smaller employers get together to contract with an outside EAP service, and peer-based programs. Peers and coworkers provide the needed services. The military has been at the forefront of drug testing since the war in Vietnam. In late 1970s, drug testing in Europe peaked at 1 in 3 soldiers testing positive for illicit drugs. In 1980, 27.6% of the soldiers in the military tested positive for illicit drugs. By 1998, the level of illicit drug use in the military dropped by 2.7%. By 2005, the level had been cut by more than 1% to 1.11%. Intense drug testing can be credited for this success. Strangely enough, when I was going through lab school, they took 2/3 of my class to become drug testers down at Brooks Air Force Base. The other 1/3 of us went out to become lab techs, but they became drug testers. In other words, they were the ones that ran the drug test. Now, strangely enough, wherever I went, because I was over the age of 21, I became the person that got to collect all the drugs. So while I was in the service for 12 years. For about 10 years of that time, I was the guy that collected all the urines. Of course, I did all the other lab work as well, but since I was over 21, I could sign whatever that legal thing. I was the one that could sign the form. So I collected a lot of urine, as much fun as that wasn't. The military has maintained a reputation for heavy drinking since its inception. It wasn't until after Vietnam and the drug control movement that the military began concentrating on curbing instead of promoting alcohol use. When I was in the military and I became an NCO, I was forced to join the NCO club, even though I didn't drink. In 1980, the level of heavy drinking in the military was 20.8%. By 1998, the level had been cut to 15.4%. At present, the level has actually increased to 17.1%, higher than the general public at 12%. The highest rate of alcohol abuse in the military is in the Marine Corps branch. The lowest level of alcohol abuse is in the Air Force, with other three branches of the military, Army, Navy, and Coast Guard, somewhere in the middle. And this guy is a Marine. This guy is a Marine, and that is an Air Force person, Navy, Coast Guard. That's another Marine. This is Army guy anyway. There we go. The Air Force was the first branch of the service to crack down on drug and alcohol abuse. There was a reason for this. When you're flying an airplane, if you're just carrying around a rifle, that's no big deal. If you're on a ship, then there are some technical things that have to happen. But in the Air Force just does one thing. It flies airplanes. And if that airplane is not put together right, if the pilot is drunk, then we have a crashed airplane potentially with ordnance on it. So the Air Force realized real early, this is right after Vietnam, they realized that they needed to do something. And that's when they stopped promoting alcohol on all the bases. Once upon a time, there were enlisted men's clubs, there were NCO clubs, and there were officers' clubs. And all of these were places where you went to get drunk. Now they have, so what they did, they combined the enlisted club with the NCO club. And in some instances, they have combined all three of them together because they were promoting alcohol usage too much. The first military EAP was the Air Force's Alcohol and Drug Abuse Prevention and Treatment Program. The Army soon followed with the Army Substance Abuse Program and the Navy's Navy Alcohol and Drug Abuse Prevention Program. And so ADAPT, ASAP, and NADAP are the three. Of course, if you were a Marine, you would go into the Navy Alcohol and Drug Abuse Prevention Program. The military's programs have been so successful because the military has almost absolute power over all military personnel. They can conduct urinalysis testing whenever or wherever they choose. Usually it's randomly done. We would select Social Security numbers, last four numbers of your Social Security number. So if your Social Security number came up, you collected a urine specimen, you had 24 hours to do it. And it had to be observed, and it had to be under lock and key. So that's really kind of curious. And sadly, I was the one that had to call these people up and give them the numbers. Sometimes you'd have lots and lots of people, and then sometimes you'd have hardly any. But it was all random. So, and if you were a general officer, it didn't make any difference. If your number came up, you collected a urine specimen. If a military member refuses to comply to either drug testing or drug rehabilitation, the military can charge them with disobeying a direct order and can discharge them from the service. With the influx of reservists and National Guard members into active duty with the hostilities in Afghanistan and Iraq, the Department of Defense instituted the following drug policies. 100% random testing of all active duty personnel, and this happens as soon as you come in, and then it happens before you go overseas, before you're deployed. Conduct random drug testing on all military personnel within 72 hours of entering active service. Separate positive testing personnel from the military, zero tolerance. Test the mandatory test panel to include new drugs. Maintain 100% mandatory testing for DoD civilian personnel. There is a reason why drug testing has shown a 66% drop in positives from 1988 to 2004. Self-reported positives have increased by 30%. Drug users will avoid applying for jobs at businesses that require a drug test. There are ways to beat the drug test, though most of them depend on a non-observant specimen collector. And of course, I was a specimen collector. And I was fairly observant. I caught people putting urine in condoms. Uh, we had to we had to make sure the urine was actually urine. So one of the things that we did we felt it to make sure it was warm. Another thing that we did, we tested it for its osmolality, um, and we just visually checked it. But you had to observe the urine going into the specimen container. Now gets kind of hairy, or this gets kind of strange when you're dealing with female personnel. Of course, I'm a male, so I couldn't watch females collecting a urine specimen. So we had to find somebody else. We had to find a nurse usually to collect drug urine from the females, if there were a female nurse around. Reasons for drug testing include pre-employment testing, for-cause testing, random testing, post-accident testing, periodic testing, rehabilitation testing of criminals on probation, testing for compliance of addicts and treatment, testing by medical examiners to determine cause of death. 12 states allow for testing of welfare recipients. The most widespread testing is in the military, the federal government employees, pre-employment drug testing, in public safety positions, transportation, drug treatment facilities. Drug testing can be conducted on any substance from the body, urine, blood, hair, saliva, sweat, tissue if necessary. Standard drug testing tests for amphetamines, cannabinoids, cocaine, opioids, phencyclidine, and alcohol. Other drugs that can be added to the testing: barbiturates, benzodiazepines, methadone, propoxyphene, which is Darvon, and methaqualone, which is Quaaludes. Drugs that are normally not tested for but can be added if suspected: LSD, fentanyl, psilocybin, MDA, and the designer drugs. Methods of testing include thin layer chromatography. This is what we used when I was in the service. This method tests for a wide variety of chemicals and is very sensitive to minute amounts of any chemical. The problem is that it can't differentiate between chemicals with similar structures, for example, ephedrine and amphetamines. Enzyme multiplied immunoassay techniques, EMIT, and radioimmunoassay, RIA, and enzyme immunoassay, EIA. EMIT tests are antibodies to seek out specific drugs. It is very sensitive and rapid, but it cannot determine concentration and produces several false positives. Poppy seeds will test as heroin. Ibuprofen will test as marijuana. Vicks Vapor inhaler tests as crank. Methods of drug testing: gas chromatography, mass spectrometry combined, and gas liquid chromatography. This system is most sensitive, accurate, and reliable method of drug testing. This system is so accurate because the technique actually breaks each chemical into fragments and then reads the fragments. This method eliminates false positives and false negatives because it not only identifies chemical structure of the drug, but it cross-references it with the metabolites that it produces. This test is very expensive and requires highly trained operators. Hair analysis can be done as most chemicals taken into the body are represented in the keratin of the hair follicle. Hair analysis tells the tester what drugs have been used while that specific hair follicle has been alive. Radioimmunoassay tests are run on the hair follicle. Confirmation is done with gas chromatography and mass spectrometry. Drugs can be detected on saliva, sweat, and on the breath. These tests are easier to obtain as they are less invasive, but they also only serve as screening tests and are prone to contamination. The alcohol breathalyzer is a good example of a breath test. Follow-up tests should always be done to confirm any results. There are many factors that influence the length of time a drug will remain detectable in a person's system: the drug itself, absorption rate, metabolism, rate of distribution in the body, excretion rate, the method employed for testing. Detection rate of psychoactive drugs: alcohol 3 to 5 days, amphetamines 2 to 4 days, methamphetamines 2 to 4 days, barbiturates short acting 24 hours, clonazepam intermediate 40 to 80 hours, diazepam long acting 7 to 30 days. Cocaine or crack 6 to 8 hours, benzoylecgonidine 2 to 3 days, marijuana single use 1 to 3 days, 4 joints a week 4 to 7 days, daily use 10 to 15 days, chronic heavy use 1 to 2 months, nicotine 12 hours. Opioids: buprenorphine 48 to 56 hours, buprenorphine conjugates 5 to 7 days, codeine 1 to 2 days, heroin, morphine is measured 2 to 4 days, hydromorphone dilaudid 2 to 4 days, methadone limited use 2 to 3 days, methadone maintenance 2 to 7 to 9 days, morphine 2 to 4 days, oxycodone, OxyContin 2 to 4 days, propoxyphene, Darvon 6 to 48 hours, PCP casual use 2 to 8 days, chronic heavy use several months, LSD and its metabolites 2 to 4 days, ecstasy 30 to 48 hours. Drug testing does seem to be reliably accurate, but is not infallible. False positives can happen when dextromethorphan have been misidentified as opiates. Some herbal teas have been known to test cocaine positive. Poppy seeds from baked goods have been misidentified as opiates. Errors have also been found after testing personnel mishandled specimens. However, most laboratory errors are false negatives than any other area. Specimen can be manipulated by testee to create a negative test when the testee is actually positive. Clean urine can be introduced into the specimen by concealed containers, urine injection into the bladder, and catheterization. Substances that have been introduced into the urine to mask the drugs present with more than questionable results include aspirin, golden seal tea, niacin, zinc sulfate, bleach, clear, water, ammonia, Drano, hydrogen peroxide, lemon juice, liquid soap, vinegar, and Visine. Of the people over 65, 83% take at least one prescription drug per day. 30% take 8 drugs or more a day. 17% of people over 60 in the United States abuse alcohol and legal drugs. Unfortunately, our society doesn't pursue elder drug abuse and alcoholism as fervently as they do these problems in younger individuals. Only 37% of elderly alcoholics are identified as compared to 60% of younger abusers. Drugs do not work the same in the system of an elderly individual as they do with someone who is younger. Enzymes in the elderly tend to be less active than in younger people. This tends to make drugs more potent in older people. For example, the loss of liver enzymes means that an individual 70 years old will get the same effect from 10 milligrams of Valium as a 21-year-old taking a 30 milligram dosage. The most frequently abused drugs after alcohol for the elderly are hydrocodone, Vicodin, narcotic cough syrup, Darvon, and other opioid analgesics. Prescription sedatives such as Klonopin, over-the-counter sedatives, over-the-counter sleep aids, Prozac, Zoloft, and Buspar. While not everyone takes their medications in the prescribed manner, the elderly tend to have more problems than others. That may be because of their memory. Overuse, taking more or many different types of drugs than prescribed. Underuse, failing to take appropriately prescribed drugs or the correct dosage. Erratic use, failure to take drugs in the right dosage or at the right time. Contraindicated use, incorrect drug being used, causing an adverse reaction or drug activity. Abuse and addiction, using drugs for non-medical purposes despite negative consequences. Common drugs abused by elders: nicotine. 94% of all 430,000 premature deaths from smoking are people over 50. Tobacco's effects are actually more pronounced in the elderly because of their inability to clear toxins as they did when they were younger. Elderly smokers have twice the mortality risk of cardiovascular disease than non smoking elders. Caffeine, the average consumption of caffeine for the elderly is 200 milligrams, 2 cups of brewed coffee. Caffeine toxicity can be seen at doses as low as 100 milligrams. When seniors use excessive caffeine, it can lead to loss of bone density, increasing the possibility of hip fractures. The most prevalent problem among the elderly is alcohol. 6 to 11% of elderly hospital admittance shows signs of alcoholism. ER visits find 14% of elderly seen shows signs of alcoholism. 20% of the elderly in psychiatric wards are alcoholic. 49% of the elderly in nursing homes are alcoholic. Because of the presenting medical problems, alcoholism is often overlooked by medical personnel. Alcohol affects the elderly so much more seriously than a younger individual because they have less efficiency of their liver. They have a decrease in body water. They have an increase in sensitivity to alcohol, decrease in tolerance to alcohol, a decrease in the metabolism of alcohol in the gastrointestinal tract. Lower amounts of alcohol will lead to intoxication for the elderly. Over-the-counter medications can cause the elderly problems. Sedatives contain antihistamines for their sedating effect, and the liquid forms have more alcohol than wine. Unisom, Sleep Ease, Nitol, and Sominex. Cold medications can contain the same combination of alcohol and antihistamines. Abuse of prescription drugs has been reported as low as 5% and as high as 33%. This occurs even in extended care facilities. Benzodiazepines are used by 71% of the elderly between 50 and 65, and 33% of those over 65. These drugs can cause confusion and falls. Abuse of prescription opioid analgesics has increased by 500% since 1990. OxyContin, hydrocodone, Vicodin, Lortab, and Norco. Well, few think those are different types of hydrocodone. While few think of the elderly as drug abusers, of the total hospital admissions for the elderly, 20% are directly due to prescription or over-the-counter drug reactions, exclusive of alcohol and illicit drug admissions. 20% of the elderly were regular drinkers and continue to exceed controllable amounts. 5 to 12% of men, 1 to 2% of women. 5 to 12% of men. 80% of seniors are arrested for 80% of senior arrests are for drunkenness. Primary prevention for the elderly need to be educated as to the changing effects of alcohol and drugs as they get older and the increased dangers of excessive use. Secondary prevention with this age group involves recognizing the early stages of alcohol and drug addiction and appropriate intervention tactics. Tertiary prevention treatment for the elderly involves a slower pace of therapy focusing on patience and reassurance. And that is the end of that chapter. Okay, don't forget your paper. You've got a paper due that is due by the end of the semester. There's only 4 of you, so getting them in isn't that important, I guess. Yeah, go ahead and get them in. Just talk about some drug, something exciting, and get the rest of your stuff in. I try to grade once a week, and the reason I do that is because otherwise I'd be grading all the time. And it's summertime, darn it. Okay, so I'll see you guys next time.